person of color cartoon character when I was 5 years old, in the early mid-1980s. Now, probably 3/4 of the shows on Nickelodeon Junior have lead protagonists that are people of color. Little Bill, Dora, Diego, the list goes on and on and on. Like my kids, just as a result of living and growing up in middle-class America, are having a multicultural experience. This says nothing about the diversity of the neighborhood we live in or the schools that they go to, right? It just says that our culture has become dramatically more representative of our nation's diversity. Why? Well, it's my generation who are writing those shows. My generation who took those sociology and anthropology and literature classes and went through freshman orientation and RA programs and diversity programs at universities like Illinois in the 1990s, who took that consciousness and those leadership skills out into the broader public square and changed America. And when we had a chance to do it at the highest level of American life, which is to say be involved in a presidential campaign and a presidential administration, we jumped at the chance. Right? It was a bunch of late 20 and early 30-somethings in the snows of Iowa with Barack Obama in 2007, launching the most improbable, victorious presidential campaign maybe in American history. What happens if universities model interfaith cooperation the same way they model multiculturalism? Project America out 30 years. Project who's in the White House. I'm gonna show up on some right-wing anti-Muslim hate blog talking about Muslims in the White House. I know this. I know that. That's gonna be the result of that tape. Project the kind of stuff that people got away with saying about Mormons in the 2012 election. However much I might have disagreed with Mr. Romney's economic policies, frankly, I admire the role his faith played in the kind of person that he was. Right? That wasn't always displayed in American public discourse. The kind of stuff that urban intellectuals, many of whom I know in cities like Chicago, say frequently about Catholics and evangelicals, it's just racist. It's just prejudice. It's stuff that people in that category would never say about Latinos or black folks or Native Americans. Right? But it passes as okay in a nation that doesn't have the interfaith literacy that it could or ought to have. The kind of madness about Barack Obama being a Muslim, right? That wouldn't happen in a country in which its higher education sector thought of itself as modeling interfaith cooperation in the same way that this sector and this university modeled multiculturalism. My organization, Interfaith Youth Corps, we work only with higher education, only with college students, because when Greg Danforth leads a hospital system, and he knows now, as somebody in his early 20s, that the most inspiring interfaith engagement happening at a prosaic level in America at any given minute is a Muslim doctor and a Jewish doctor saving the life of a Catholic patient, and there's probably 1,000 of those operations taking place in our nation right now, and the story is never told. When he's CEO of a hospital system, he will tell those stories. He will recognize just how important it is for America to know that narrative, right? When Masood is leading Interfaith Youth Corps, taking over my position. You want to do it next year, by the way? He'll go even beyond where we've gone currently. He'll think to himself, what if college campuses had partnerships with high schools and grade schools in their communities? And interfaith literacy went from being a vanguard initiative at the college campus level to part of the mainstream and water of American life at the grade school and high school level. I love college campuses because of the role they play as a launching pad, the role they play as an incubator, the role they play as micro and model civil societies, but more than anything else, because of the role they play in inspiring and launching young people like Masood and Greg. I am one of those young people. I'm proud to be back here, and I want to thank you for your attention.
This is a little bit awkward, but it will help greatly with questions if Mike the questions, both so that the whole group can hear and so that they are then recorded as a part of the recording system. So, Eboo, as you acknowledge questions, I will get the microphone.
Great.
I will thank you. It was really inspiring. I want to ask about pushback. So you mentioned the fear of President Obama as a Muslim. There is probably the same amount of fear of President Obama as an African American, and the quote-unquote white majority losing this country to people of color. And I imagine that a lot of the intercultural diversity that was engendered by universities like this one in the 90s, there was huge pushback from people who thought that, no, this is a white country and should remain a white Christian Anglo-Saxon country. So what kind of pushback do you expect when we move from intercultural diversity to interfaith diversity?
I think it's a great question. So there are a million ways to take that question. I want to address what I think is a reasonable pushback to this, and then I want to talk about, I think, a common way forward, so to speak. So I speak in this talk almost entirely positively about the multicultural movement. Actually, in my books, I talk about some of the downsides of that movement and how I was involved in some of those downsides. And the label frequently given to those is identity politics. And I think identity politics is a risk, and it's a cliff that I went off of. Let me define what I mean by identity politics. That people understand themselves as only and exclusively part of a racial, ethnic, religious minority. Only and exclusively, right? I want to make that clear. So in other words, the Asian American hyphen, the American part is left out in the identity politics kind of paradigm. And the question is, who am I as an Asian? And frequently it's, how have you oppressed me? And I don't think you can build a nation like that. And I think that the people who are cautious about that. So Arthur Schlesinger Jr., the great historian, writes an important book in the 1990s called The Disuniting of America. Another important book, the author is failing me right now, it'll come back to me, a book called Post-Ethnic in the 1990s. And what these were books that said American cultural diversity is hugely important. It has too often been left out of the picture. It ought to be included in the picture, but we are not simply a neutral land of separate and squabbling racial and ethnic groups. We are a single united nation. And the question in the single united nation ought to be threefold. One is, who am I? Two is, how do I relate to you? And three is, what do we do together? I'm going to repeat those. Who am I? How do I relate to you? What do we do together? Not, who am I? How have you oppressed me? How can I accentuate my oppositional identity? And I fell into that for some time, right? And at IFYC, we are very clear in integrating ourselves, in grounding ourselves in the narrative of a nation that is both many and one, to borrow the great term from Martin Marty. Right? So I would say we come out of, I'm being very geeky here, we come out of the political philosophy of folks like Martin Marty, Michael Walzer, Arthur Schlesinger Jr., which embraces both diversity and seeks a common life. Great line by Michael Walzer. The challenge of a diverse society is to welcome and embrace its diversity while maintaining a common life. Right? And I think that the challenge of a constituent community within that diversity, Asian Americans, African Americans, Jewish Americans, Muslim Americans, is to maintain their difference, but contribute to a common life, right? So, and I come to that, actually in my years after college. I come to that by reading a lot of Martin Luther King Jr. and reading a lot of James Baldwin and recognizing that people who had experienced the business end of the police baton and the whip of the slave master in Alabama had looked to America and said, this is still the promised land. And I seek to still contribute to and improve and build this nation.